Right, so today I want to make a video about this tweet. Uh, it's from Richard Bailey. Now, he is a historian, retired professor, so someone who isn't just talking out of his butt. Again, I would just point that, not that it really matters to. I don't think you have to be a expert or have a PhD in some topic or even a degree in some topic to still be able to talk about a topic and be knowledgeable in it. But he goes on to say, this lockdown is a fascinating study in mass psychology. I'm beginning to understand how easy it was for Hitler to accomplish what he did. Give the masses a reason to believe a tyranny is acting in their best interests, and they will follow. And that's what we're seeing in Canada and in most of the world right now, in that we have a quote unquote pandemic. Technically, it is, but it's not nearly as bad as what it was made out to be. And again, there's no debate of that. The original death rates were projected to be 3 to 7%. We're looking at zero point 0.1 for zero point 0.1, zero point 0.2 at the most for healthy people. And I mean, it is relatively high for very old people, but again, that's a very small percent of the population. And that percent of the population could be quarantined regardless of whether or not the rest of the population is. So that's something to point out. The other big thing to point out too is just how many people the government can convince to act against their own self-interest. Now, for the simple reason that the government has convinced everyone that if we don't have to, or if we don't lock everything down, there's going to be mass outbreaks, everybody's going to die, the hospitals will be overwhelmed, and there's no evidence of that. There's been places that have stayed open. The hospitals haven't been overwhelmed. There's been places that have been open for over 2 weeks now. The hospitals haven't been overwhelmed. So it's this pipe dream that they refuse to acknowledge. Now, there's one of two things going on here. I think it's more the second, but um, it's up for debate. It's definitely up for debate. But the first thing that it could be is they're just incompetent. But I refuse to believe that so many experts and so many people in positions of power could be so incompetent and wrong about something that is relatively simple to figure out, especially at this point. 2 months ago, yeah, it was relatively hard to make an accurate prediction, but at this point, it's so obvious it's not even funny. So again, it could be incompetence or it could be nefarious intentions. I think it's clearly at least more nefarious intentions. I think there's definitely some incompetence, but there's clearly a lot of nefarious intentions. You take the forced vaccine agenda, which again, regardless of whether or not you believe in vaccines, there's zero reason to believe that people should be forced to take them, because if you believe in them and you get it, then you have immunity. I mean, assuming that they work, which they don't 100% of the time. They do most of the time, but not 100% of the time. So again, the people that are for forced vaccinations are people who are incredibly like stupid, or people that are incredibly authoritarian. Like I say, for the simple reason that if you have a vaccine, then you're supposed to be immune. It doesn't matter if other people don't have them. So that's something to point out too. I mean, the other things too is that the government is experimenting with de facto UBIs. They're experimenting with other certain powers. Um, the government, the United States government basically just admitted to the existence of UFOs, and it was like an afterthought. Like most people aren't even talking about it. I mean, like just think of that too. If that would have came out during a slow news cycle, that'd have been massive news. But there's more than likely going to be a massive recession, which means that the majority of people are just going to beg for the government to solve all their problems, when in reality it's the government's fault we're in the problem in the first place. So how can you possibly expect them to solve the problem? But like I say, that's the other thing too, is that there's a lot of people that stand to gain a lot from this happening, and the problem is people refuse to acknowledge that, like stand to gain massively, because the problem with government and the way that it's set up is that if things are going good, well, the government says, yeah, things are going good because of us, vote for us. If they're going bad, it's because, oh, we didn't have enough power, we didn't have enough, ability to regulate. We need to bring in this regulation, that new law, this new law. We need to give more money, all that kind of stuff. It's never enough. So either way, they win. And that's the problem, is that the minute they screw something up, they should be at the very least face downsides or not punished. That doesn't necessarily mean throw them in jail, but they should be fired. They should lose out on money, something. And that's the only way to make government functional. So if you screw up, you lose out on something. The problem is that the Canadian government has completely botched this entire situation, but yet Justin Trudeau gets a $2 million renovation for his house paid for by taxpayers. I mean, he's done a brutal job of running this. All the MPs got a raise recently. They've completely screwed this up. Like, the Liberals are absolutely insane, and like it's not even a question. The Conservatives don't have the balls to question them to the ability or enough to actually be a decent opposition. I understand it's partially because if they do actually have some balls, they're going to get a lot of flack. But again, the left is going to call you mean names no matter what. As long as you have a conservative next to your name or a Republican next to your name, the left is going to call you all the mean names in the book regardless. So you might as well just stand in your principles. So that's another thing to point out. But again, it's a psychological technique, and that the government has conditioned people to believe, like I say, that it's in their best interest to do stuff that isn't in their best interest, and that this whole lockdown, looking back on it, was a complete farce. It never should have happened in the first place, aside from locking down nursing homes and allowing people who have poor health to the option of staying home. That's all that should have happened. It's blatantly obvious. The countries that did that, it proved to be very effective. The states that have been open the longest, the provinces that have been open the longest, nothing has happened. Um, so basically, to bring it back to the whole Nazi thing, is that, like I say, most of the people who were quote unquote Nazis were relatively reluctant. I mean, you look at the Germans of the past. Like I always use the example in World War One or World War Two. I don't remember which one, but they had a soccer game on. I think it was like Christmas or one of the days where they stopped fighting, and it was like the people describe it in their writings. Yeah, it was completely normal. It was like a backyard soccer game from the with the neighborhood kids when you were growing up. Like, the majority of the people were not. They didn't actually, they weren't super evil people. Like, if you're a super evil, take Hitler for example, super evil guy, you wouldn't have a soccer game with the opposition. So again, the majority of people reluctantly went along with it because the government convinced them it was in their best interest. And that's the problem with people nowadays, is that um, one of the best qualities you can have is the ability to question the narrative, to constantly question the narrative. That's how innovation is done. Again, people saying, hey, what can be better than the horse? What can be better than walking? Well, the car. What's a way we can get somewhere faster than the car or boat? Oh, planes. You know, think of every little invention. The best inventions are things that, hey, questioning the narrative. Hey, can we do this better? Can we save more time? Can we make things more efficient? That's how, again, all innovation is done. The problem with so many people nowadays is that their ability to question the narrative is almost non-existent, which is why so many people are so unsuccessful, whatever you want to call it. And that's something that's not taught in school, and it's something that really should be. Well, I mean, largely because public school is a terrible terror. It's largely pointless aside from the basic stuff they teach you that could easily be taught by other people. Um, I mean, in high school, most of the stuff they teach you is pointless. They should be teaching people about finance, civics, how to start your own business, psychology, nutrition, all that stuff that all should be taught, but none of it is taught. What's taught is um, most of the stuff taught in English. Who cares about Mozart or Beethoven? Does physics, like, does the average person really need to know physics? Does the average person really need to know biology? Maybe to a small degree. Does the average person need to know? I mean, the stuff they teach you about history is largely just entirely about the Nazis in World War II, basically, but they don't give you a lot of the take-home points that are really important of World War II. They don't tell you anything about how communism killed, over 100 million people in school, but yet they'll tell you how bad the Nazis were, and again, rightfully so, but the death count was much lower. So, anyway, I wanted to make a video about this because, again, the government is always the government is always trying to find ways to, how can we convince people to do things that they may not go for in normal times, um, you know, but if we create this crisis, then they'll go for it. And that's the problem too, is that so many people are, again, sheep is a very good comparison because they just follow the crowd. again, that's what the government does too. They'll get these celebrities or high level government figures, and they'll get the flock moving, and then everyone just follows them. Like, no one questions the narrative. And again, like I say, all innovation is done by questioning the narrative. you know Getting rid of slavery was done by questioning the narrative. Hey, is slavery immoral? Hey, if we didn't have slavery, I mean, the other big reason for getting rid of slavery was that it was holding back innovation. And then after slavery was gotten rid of, it was very soon after that the combine was invented. And all of a sudden, the efficiency of being able to farm went way up because there was no reason to innovate when you had slavery because labor is free. But when there's no slavery, it's not free, which means there's an incentive to automate, right? So, like I say, um, the main take home point we should take from this entire pandemic, scamdemic, plandemic, those are some better words for it, is question the narrative. Because if we would have questioned it, I mean, a lot of people were, if we would have questioned the narrative off the start, we wouldn't be in this mess. And the problem, what people don't seem to understand about this, is that they think that we're going to be able to just snap our fingers and go back to normal after this. That's not going to happen. We're going to walk out of this in one of the worst recessions, if not the worst recession the country has ever seen. And people are going to beg that we could go back and be like, hey, we should have opened our economy a lot longer. The pain and suffering going on right now far outweighs the pain and suffering that went on during the pandemic or the scamdemic or the plandemic. Um, so again, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. But again, people need to wake up, because it's the only way that things change is if you really make your voice heard too. That when you talk to the average person, they're so dumbed down that it's not even funny. And the problem is most people get their opinions on stuff based off what other people believe, because it's just basic psychology too. When people are unsure, they look to what is the societal narrative too. Like, it's the classic example of someone having a heart attack in the streets, in a crowded street. And if you look around and nobody's stopping to help the person having a heart attack, most people would just walk on by. But if other people are stopping, then you're probably going to stop too. And again, studies have been done on this, so again, no questioning that. Um, and that's the problem people see with this kind of stuff, is that they'll be like, the average person is the Karen who believes you know we need to keep things locked down or we're all going to die crowd. That's what the average person sees, so therefore that's what they believe. And that's the problem too, is that and we supposedly fought World War II and World War I, and whatever else you want to add to that list, to fight for our freedoms, but yet most of the people now are giving up the same freedoms that we fought for. Like, again, we have no free speech in Canada. We have no due process in Canada. We don't have the right to unlawful search and seizure anymore. I mean, what else? I mean, if we go out in public, we're risking, someone reporting us and getting a massive fine. We don't have rights right now. And the problem is that most of the things that of the tyrannical laws and policies that government implement, they implement it as a temporary measure during a time of pandemic, of war, of a time of a bad time basically. And they just never gave up the power too. Again, the income tax was put in during World War I, I think World War II in Canada, World War I in the States, to be a temporary thing to pay for the war. Guess what? It stayed. The Patriot Act, I believe, was supposed to be temporary as well. Again, it stayed. All this kind of stuff that the government puts in is temporary, and then it stays. Or they'll put in this policy, again, gun control is a good example of this. There's other stuff too, but they'll be like, oh, we just need to increase restrictions just a little bit, and then the problem will be better. And sure enough, the problem doesn't get better, like, I mean, anyone with a brain would predict. And their solution to it will be, oh, we didn't take it quite far enough. We have to take it a little further. And then people say, oh, whatever. And then that doesn't work. And then they say, oh, just a little further, just a little further. And before you know it, everything's gone. And the thing about it is that they do it over a period of time. So the average, dumbed down, average citizen doesn't even recognize it. So anyway, I wanted to make a video about this because again, it's very, very important stuff. And again, the biggest thing about this virus is the take-home message that we should be taking. So anyway, I'm going to leave the video there. If you'd like to, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already. Again, just got Twitter recently, so check me out on there. And then check me out on BitChute as well if you haven't already too.